Well, hello there, and welcome once again to my little arty corner of the internet. Once again, if you're revisiting or coming back again, returning to watch another video by me, and just welcome if you're new here. And I really do mean that. I really do hope what you enjoy seeing. It's sort of an exploration of art by me, I suppose, and methods and techniques I use and the way I think, partly to perhaps help and inspire you, but also to help me to understand what goes on in my brain when I create, because often I'm not aware of this. So forcing me to speak out my thought processes and ideas and so on is something a bit different, and it's helping me to understand myself a lot more. So if you viewed yesterday's video, you'll know that I drew this image. Can't quite see all of it here, but yesterday afterwards I did spend time finishing adding some further line work. So within these leaves I've put some extra sections to try to add the feeling of almost like there are curves there, or folds almost, some structure to the leaf. And I've also added colour, and I used distress inks for this. I used Rusty Hinge and tea dye for the browner parts, and the greenish parts I used old paper, which is actually it looks like the colour that old paper does go, or some that greeny kind of tinge. Other goes sort of like more of the tea dye or brownie version, but this one's green. And I thought that subtle green would be great for the leaves and other bits. And I've also added some gold, and I just thought that would add that touch of bling. And both on the these bottom bits here where I've put, I don't know if we'll catch it, hopefully if I get the angle right. Too difficult this is. Okay, let's have a look, try again, different angle. Oh, there we go, you just get a hint of it. I put gold on the outside edges of these ribbons, and I've used a background pattern, and you can see where I've put dots around some of the curves of the leaves as well. And I just thought that added something to the background. In hindsight, perhaps a bit too much bling. Yesterday, when I was writing about this on my blog, I wasn't sure whether I should have added colour or not, but I've had several hours away. I've slept since I did this, and coming back to it, I'm thinking, actually, that looks okay. The one thing I haven't done well is under here and under here, where I wanted to add some shadow underneath elements like the leaves and things to lift this up off the paper. So I tried with distress inks, and I just realised I was just moving and shifting everything around. And of course, I thought about doing that after I added the gold dots. Should have done it first, but there we are. So what I thought I'd do today, it's partly for my own benefit, but also for yours, is I thought it'd be quite nice to have a look at different ways of adding shadow to a drawing, a design, so I can compare them on in one place. So I'm going to choose a piece. I'm going to choose that one. I could have chosen any of these pre-coloured papers, coloured with distress ink. This is done most probably with, it looks like tea dye and Rusty Hinge. I'm not sure if there's a hint of vintage photo around the edge. I first need to find my glasses, because I don't have anything here that I need to shadow. So my first job, oh gosh, why did I forget to get these out? Because I do. I need a pen or two, and perhaps a pencil, just in case. And I'm going to draw some things that I can then try adding shadow to. And I just thought that it might be quite nice to do it on a nice piece of paper and to create something that can end up in my sketchbook. It's not A5 in size, and I'm fine with that, because my sketchbook is, well, it's a sketchbook, so it can go, any size paper can go in there. This is my disc bound one I'm thinking about. And look at that, missed a bit there, but it's not important. and I can put bindings along one edge. So I'm just going to keep it simple. So I'm going to draw. Just going to draw some of those leaf shapes again and pop that band down the middle, because this will make it easier to compare. I use things that are pretty similar, I think. And I've dug out some materials I'm going to use to try adding shadow with. The one I haven't done is coloured pencils, and I haven't got markers out either. So I'll see how I feel about those, but I'm going to use just pen, same pen as I'm drawing with, well, a finer version of. A ballpoint pen, a biro. Graphite pencil, watercolor pencil. I'm just going to pop one in here. And I may get markers and coloured pencils out so that I can perhaps compare those as well. Because the idea I'm thinking, you know, if I have that reference, I can make a perhaps better judgment of either what works best for me, what kind of feeling I want to have in a drawing, and they're all higgledy-piggledy because I can put things all higgledy-piggledy on such a page. Oh look, it's one of those shapes. And I think it'd be quite nice as a reference, and it is just focusing on adding shadow, contrast, things like that today. And yeah, I'm putting lots of leaves on the page because I may use this to reference other things. We'll see how we go. Well, I might as well fill the space up. It really doesn't take much longer to do this than just to draw a couple. Once it's done, isn't it? That's fine. And I've got space around them to write in how I do this. So let me pick a pen. I've got a finer, move that there. I have got a finer fine liner pen here. So I'm just going to write along the edge of the leaf. 0.2 micron. And then I know what pen I've used to add the shading. And if you remember, I said yesterday, and I had to remind myself then, that I prefer to do this by flicking the pen away from me. So the longest strokes are the ones that are sparsest. They've got distance between them, so it gives that visual image that we're getting lighter, that visual clue. And then shorter ones are much denser, almost to black actually in places here, to clue in that idea that this is a lot more in shadow. And of course you vary the density of the lines depending on how much shadow or light you want. And I'm also curving these a little to give that feeling that the leaf edge is curved a little at the bottom. It's quite subtle, but you can do it as boldly as you like, or not. It's following the contours of the shape of the leaf. So that already starts to bring some dimension into it. And I'm going to add shadow from this end, but perhaps not as far down as to the middle of the leaf. But I am going to take the edge up to meet where the shadowy edge is there, and I'm going to do the same on either side of the vein, just to add some shadow on each side. So I want to leave a clear gap in between, but not right across the leaf. I still want this shadow around the edge, and I'm trying to curve these lines, though my hand doesn't want to do what my mind is telling me to do. My mouth is uttering. Hand, listen to me. It's to get that curvy shape. So, bit messy, but it works. Okay, next material to use, and I've got a scrappy piece of paper here so I can get this working. Biros often need a bit of help to work, so I'll use biro on the one next door. Biros, even when this is a fine point biro and it's just a cheapy one, you can get others that have got finer points than this. I think Zebra do them, and Pentel. But it's more grey, in fact a bluey grey, than it is black. We'll take the same approach. I'm going to do the same kind of thing with each leaf. And with the biro, the more layers you put on, the darker it becomes. So I get that, not just the line becoming thinner, it becomes a much lighter, paler colour. And by adjusting the pressure on the pen, I can get a lighter, a much lighter colour. It's not so easy to do with the fine liners because they're pigment ink. I'm not sure what biros are. I know they're oil-based rather than water-based. So I suspect they may have some pigments in, but they're more likely to be oil-based dyes. The lovely thing about biros as well, because they're oil-based, they never react with water. And that's a much more subtle gradient. The one thing you do get is some shine with light. So as the light's catching this, it actually gives a red cast. I don't know if I can pick it up on the camera. Knowing my luck, most probably not. Yeah, there you go. You just got a flash of it there. And I'm not too worried about that because I think that would add quite a bit of interest. This will take a bit more time if I want to build up intense shadows at the base, because I've got to put a lot more biro down. But the lighter the hand you get, the paler the colour. So that is a difference. That's the difference between these and the micron. And I'll just extend those shadows a little bit around the edge, because I can get such fine lines, or such a light colour. I can get a better blend one into the other, as it were. Here I need to leave quite a distinct space almost to get that highlight. This is a softer feel of highlights. As I'm using this, I'm thinking, why don't I use this more? I think it requires me to pop biros in my pencil case, so I've always got them there. I have a pencil case where I keep the pens I am using. I've got pencil cases all over the place with different kinds of pens stored in them. But the ones that I use, my workhorse pens, my everyday pens, I keep both in a tray with other tools in, and but the ones that I use, that I carry around with me around the house, that I pop on the bed beside me at night, because I live alone, so my sketchbook and pencil share my bed, which Possibly sounds very sad, but actually, I'm actually fine with that. Wake up in the middle of the night and I can't sleep. The best thing for me to do rather than toss and turn is to draw. Listen to a documentary or audiobook and draw. So there we are. I think that will do for now. The only disadvantage of these is if you're not careful, you get globs of biro ink that come off and you can get like blotches and smudges. The other thing with biros is that you can get them in lots of different colours. Black would be my choice, but blue could be quite interesting, or green, depending on what we're doing. So there's the biro. Okay, next one I'm going to use, oh, that's my watercolour pencil. Let's go to a Pitt Graphite pencil, and I am going to pop, and this is a 2B, so I will write that on one side and I'll dig the 6B out and pop it on the other, and then I've got a comparison of each. Okay, and I have a tortillon here, but I think I'm going to need a different one because that one was the one I used with a chalk pastel yesterday. So let me just buff this in. Mainly to smooth it out, but also to get that little extra fading into that highlighted area. Now the advantage of this is that if I'm careful and I don't work it too hard, or even if I do, I've still got the option of going back there and removing some of the colour or some of the graphite to lighten it. So if I spread it too far, if I haven't got enough of a highlight, I can always go back and remove some of this. And what I'm using here is a 6B, and you can see the difference in how dark the colours are. And in theory, the 6B should be easier to smooth out, especially as there's a layer of graphite underneath, so I can darken that. Now, using a tortillon does help in getting a nice smooth blend, but it is possible to add shadows in much the same way as you would, or as I would with the fine liner or the biro. And increasing the pressure where I want it darkest. But I'm also going to use the 6B as well to get a much darker, more intense colour. Now, even though this is a matte graphite, there's still shine with it. And it's grey rather than black. So just going to use the tortillon just to fade those end lines out, because I have got some that's a bit too obvious. So I will write on this with a fine liner. So these are 6B and 2B Pitt Graphite Matte. So that's the extent of the pens I wanted to try, or dry media really, apart from coloured pencils. But I have got here, this one I'm going to use Graphite. And I have a Graphite pencil here, and I can use this in much the same way I would an ordinary pencil. In that I could add shadow by just colouring it in and intensifying it. I'm using an indigo one, so I got this out to have a look at adding shadows. So this would work in pretty much the same way. I've never tried using a tortillon with these. Let's have a look. You just get that paper and just scribble off on the back to get rid of any excess. There's hardly any extra graphite on there. It's good. Yeah, the tortillon will actually smooth that out as well, so that's a nice thing to know. So on this side I'll write so I remember what I've done. Tortillon and dry. Graphite tints and water. There we go. So I know what I'm doing, or what I've done. Oh, this one, because I'm going to be using water to spread the colour out, I just need to put some graphite tint where I want the densest colour. And perhaps just ease some out into the areas I want to go into with just some shadow. So I'm using a water brush for convenience. I find a water brush is better for this because it will help to dilute the colour, and I haven't got that issue of running out of water partway through and getting lines quite so badly. This paper is Canson Imagine, so it's mixed media paper, so it works well kind of with water and watercolours. It's not watercolour paper, but it does remain damper longer than, say, the sketchbook paper would, which is what my drawing yesterday was on, which was probably why, even though it's sized, the paper, it's got a coating on it, so it will take watercolour. It's not so easy to work on. It does dry a lot quicker. So here I can already see this gives a much more, this gives those lines and the colours darker. This brings out the blue colour more, but it allows a more painterly effect as well. So that's quite nice. Okay, next one. I have got, I'm going to use General's pastel chalk. I don't know why they call them pastel chalks. It's chalk pastels. The chalk's the description. Except I'm going to go and hunt out the blue one, because that black is just, I don't know. Sometimes black is just way too harsh. Okay, what colour's this? Grass green. Oh, is that the indigo? It's indigo blue, but it's not really an indigo blue. It'll do. It's much more of a blue, but we're having blue leaves. I can live with blue leaves today. And perhaps for comparison, let me have a look. That was the black one. Just clean it off, get most of the black off that I can. So there's hardly any black coming off, I think. Apologise for the squeaking. Sets my teeth on edge too. So that's the bluish one. These spreads fairly far. It depends how much chalk you put down and how much you pick up with the tortillon first. But it's not so easy for me to leave that light gap, but I should be able to pick some of the colour up or use a different colour over the top. So use that one. Let me try this now with, instead of a black, I got a grey. That's grass green. It's a light grey. I don't want a light grey. I've got a bluish, I think it's a bluish grey. It looks bluish. It looks bluish in the light there. But this is a carbothello. A whole different beast in its way. So I may get some blue from the, oh, perhaps not, because I'm mixing up these tortillons. This doesn't spread as far, and there's a reason why. Because the carbothellos so I'll put the carbothello there, but I'll choose to use it on one of these as well, because the carbothello is slightly water reactive. There's some pigments in it that means I am going to use a tortillon just to ease it into the paper. That will ease the chalky parts in, spread them out, but I should be able to tease some of the colour out with a water brush. You can see that. It's very subtle. There's not very much pigment. Well, there is actually quite a bit of pigment coming off, but it's very subtle, and there's a fair amount of it is distress ink, but it does give a different feel. So that's the carbothellos and water. Ooh. Let's try writing in pen. So that's another alternative. This is I've got here a dark indigo Albrecht Dürer watercolour pencil, because they were at hand. Now this, distress inks, Ecoline pens, watercolour paints, they'll all work in a very similar way depending on how you apply them. But I like pencils best in many ways, because I can really make sure I get the colour where I want it darkest in the places I want it darkest by applying it as if I'm using, well, as a pencil, and then just use the brush, the water brush, just to tease that colour out. And also the water really brings the colour in the pencil to life. And with this I try to work from light to dark, but I do need to work along that edge to blend it just a little bit perhaps. Depends on how I want that highlight, and here it needs to be, I don't want those harsh edges. I'm thinking along the lines of how I added the pen lines, is having colour blending one into another, but keeping an area that is mostly, or has very subtle colour in it. So here I'm doing it slightly differently, because I am applying water to where the ink is most, cleaning the brush off on the back of my hand because I forgot to get some tissue, and then just blend that out. The advantage of this is that if that middle bit is too light, I can always add water and lift it up at a later date. So this is watercolour pencil. Water. Okay, so that essentially are the ones that I thought of doing. I'm going to make some noise actually, I'll be back in a moment because I'm going to tidy up a bit, put some things back where they are, and I'm going to go and get some other media to try on these. So back in a moment. Okay, back again. I've only got a couple more, but let's have a look at these. I have picked up a Colour Soft pencil, and I've picked up one it's steel grey. It's nice and sharp, the point is, and I will use that in two ways. One way is gradually adding shadows. This is just one pencil. I'm not going to do any colour blends or anything. God forbid. I should inflict that upon you. It's not my best skill. Colour is not my best skill. I'm looking here for I'm just looking at how I can add perhaps colour or shadow and highlight to my work, and pretty much monochrome, because that is how it works best for me, I think, because I'm not very good with mixing colours or choosing what colours to use together. I find I get more success if I use things like distress inks, I suppose, because the distress ink palette is meant to work together. Okay, so that's one side with this. I haven't really got a very good highlight here. But that can be altered. If I go back to the pot, I should be able to find somewhere in here. It'll be right at the bottom, because that's where it always ends up, because this is a colour that I use so much, it's ridiculous. Or have done in the past, and this is a white Colour Soft pencil. That means I can put the highlight in white, and it actually helps to burnish the other colours. So to get that contrast now, I can darken up the areas of contrast right into the corner. And then I've got this is there are many brands of these. They're blender pencils for coloured pencils. This one is a Caran d'Ache, which I particularly like because there's no wood with them, and they are entirely blender. They're waxy, I think. I'm not sure if they're wax-based or oil-based, but they really do blend the pencils. Derwent do one, and Derwent's is more, it's got more of an abrasive feel to it, and it picks up, this picks up colour on the tip, but it also gives, I don't know if you can see, I'm trying to look at my camera as well as through my glasses, which is useless. Can you see it gives a shine to the pencil as well, but it also helps to bring the colours out. I think it creates almost like a glossy layer over the top, and you then get colour, colours shining through. Now then, I've just brought one over here. There it is. What I'm going to do on the other side is I'm going to use this. This is one of these ball tools. It's an embossing tool, which you can use with with parchment or paper. And if you've watched sort of like the latest 12 Days of Zentangle, they used something like this quite a lot. Coloured pencil artists and artists have used things like this for a long time. It's used to score into the paper so that when you add colour, that paper stays white. I don't think it works particularly well with watercolours. I could be wrong, but I know it works well with dry media. It'll work with graphite and chalk. But what I'm going to do here with the coloured pencil is I'm going to put the highlight in with this in a similar way to how I put the shadow in. So with this, instead of putting shadows, I'm putting highlights in. Now the nice thing about this as well is that you can layer colours. So I could put a light colour down and get the lightest highlights. And if you're you know, a pet or animal portrait artist, this is brilliant for hair and fur. I'm not, but it's a nice way to keep the pure white colour of paper or lighter colours as you increasingly add darker colours to them. So here it's the reverse version of these, where I've kept the highlights with the embossed tool. Let's have a look. I'm just trying to show, glasses have to go up, but you can see how those lines show through. And I could have done that in another way. I'm not entirely sure. Let me have a look. Let me just label this. That's my O2. So this is Colour Soft and Blender. You can use blending fluid and you moisten a tortillon or Q-tip or something like that in it. And wipe it over. I can't use them anymore because the smell, the solvent sets asthma off on me. And I just start coughing uncontrollably, which is not a good thing. It's not the same as an allergy. It causes an asthma attack. So there. Okay, let's have a look, because I've got graphite here. So let's have a look at this with graphite, because you can do the same with graphite. And I am going to think about the kinds of shape of highlight I want here. And again, you can layer them. You get different size ball tools for the ends. This one has quite a big selection. I think I bought it from Amazon. And all the extra tools are actually stored in the shaft. Double ends, so I've got a bigger ball tool on one end. Let's go back to this graphite. And let's have a look at one side with graphite. So I can tell instantly, I haven't looked at the barrel of the pencil, but this is the 6B, so it's the darker one. So let's get that and let's do some blending out. And where I blend this, it will show where the embossing is, and you can see that those lines remain white in amongst that shadow. And also it will work with chalks. So I've got some grey Carbothello on this side. Doesn't matter which one I use, that one's just at hand. And hopefully you can see that in both cases, those lines that I put into, try this, the lines remain visible, not as clearly as for the coloured pencil, interestingly. I think that's because I use the tortillon in this and it helps to push it down into the spaces. But yeah, again, I can, if I pick it up, I'm not going to pick it up from in those cracks particularly, but it does work. So let me have a look. before I forget what they are, so this is Pitch Graphite, Matte and Carbothello. I don't need to write, I used an embossing tool there, I can see that pretty much so. And let's have a go at an embossing tool with some water soluble media, which means I've got to go thirtling for one of them. I've got one there. I've got my still got the Graphite tint. I won't use the watercolor pencil, the Artwyrd, because them and Graphite tint work pretty much in a similar way. It's just the finish you get is quite different with them. Because the colour and the insoluble graphite that's in the Graphite tint. So let's have a look and see whether the water does cause these to settle into the gaps, or whether the indents, the embossed lines, remain very visible or lacking colour. I think the colour actually settles into them, which is what I'd expect actually. But it's only once they've dried really I'm going to be able to tell. And I may actually need to put a lot more colour across there than I would normally to have to see that. So again, I'll label this before I forget what it is. So I'll do it on this side. The embossed lines are visible, but they have got some colour, but they add texture, so you see them in different lights. But I just thought I'd try them because my instinct was right. Of course it would. And then what I want to do with one of these leaves is to use some distress ink. And I've got distress inks here. This is actually aged mahogany. So I'm not going to dig out the blue or anything, but this is like watercolour, but I've picked some colour up, and I'm hoping that the water brush will help to fade it out. I can help fade it out a little bit by taking some of the colour off, getting onto my hand, but I can get that kind of gradient going. This will pick up the colour, any water soluble medium will pick up the background colour. If you've like me, I've pre-coloured the paper with distress ink, but that's not a bad thing in some ways. It's added an interesting effect to the water soluble ones, so I can do that. Now I can go back and add more colour just to the tops if I want to intensify it, and tops and bottoms just to make sure. And if I wanted to add a bit more shadow, I can do that and just fade it out. Same on the other side. A bit more intense colour here. I don't want that to fade into my highlight, but do it like this. So that's another way of adding colour, and that looks really quite colourful compared to all the others. So there's a number of ways of doing this. The other thing about the embossing tool is that it's possible to add pattern and texture as well. So hang on, before I do out else, let me have a look. Distress ink. And brush. Oh, I just used the distress ink that was in the palette. I haven't cleaned it out, so I just made use of that one. Different ways of getting shadow. The other thing is, again, if you've seen the 12 Days of Zentangle, they made use of this kind of idea there. But what I'm doing here is I'm using this ball tool, because that's what I know them as, an embossing tool, a ball tool, because they've got a ball on the end, to emboss the lines of the leaf into the paper. And I'm going to use the grey Carbothello, I think, on this. Slightly different way of shading. So I'm going to pop it just along the edges of the leaves, and I am going to use the tortillon just to where I've applied the chalk, it's going to remain the darkest, but I can tease it down into towards where the lighter area is. And if I haven't got enough chalk, I just go back and add a little bit more. It's best to build things up in layers always. I can get bold first off and regret it later. It's important to remember to leave that highlight in the middle, and then this is almost like the leaves are curving over outwards, so you need the outside edge to have that darkness as if it's in shadow, and I'm going to add a bit more in the middle. Just repeat until that contrast is at the right level to give you the feeling of bending of the leaf, curving of the leaf, curling of the leaf perhaps. That I actually do like that. It may be that I'm beginning to understand that perhaps, just perhaps, I'm choosing perhaps the wrong colours to try to create shadow and highlight. But we are. I didn't think I'd use as many leaves as I have here, but there is a good number of methods and techniques here that you can get an idea for what would work. The black line here looks just so stark in comparison to others. I particularly like the softness of biro, which looks quite blue there, but it's catching the light here, so it looks like a purpley blue. The matte graphite is fine, but I think I'd have to work on leaving those highlights or putting highlights in, because it does spread quite a bit. The Carbothello and water is an interesting one, both with blending that grey out, but then using water to blend the grey into the background colour. So these are just the chalk pastels on their own. This is Graphite tint and water and Graphite tint and tortillon. I much prefer it with water, but I can see the benefit of that. Watercolor pencil with this is lovely because you've got almost like rusty areas where the brown is showing through. It hasn't necessarily moved the distress ink. Coloured pencil and blender is nice. It's not particularly me. It could work, and bearing in mind monochrome and so on, it might work better for me if I used two colours, one darker, one lighter. Perhaps I'll try that in a moment. The distress ink is really lovely. I do like that. I've done a much better job on that. This is interesting, but the embossing is the interesting thing for both pastels and with coloured pencils. I've ended up here with something that feels very much like the biro, except I haven't done a very good job of embossing before I add the colour. But let me have a quick shifty here and see if I can quickly find a darker grey, for a darker colour. That's a petrol grey. So I've got steel grey. Have I got a light grey? Mid grey, cloud blue, which is a blue. Top end looks grey. I've got dove grey. So let's have a look with these. Oh, excuse me. Door. Okay, where was I? It was the my weekly organic fruit and veg and stuff delivery. So yeah. Oh yes, I know where it was. So I've chosen a lighter grey and a darker grey, and let's see how this will work out. I am going to try my darndest to do the highlight exactly the kind of shape I want, and I'm going to use the light grey first. I'll only do one side most probably, because who'd have thought looking at different ways of adding shadow would take quite so long. Just a vaguely lighter grey. I've still got the white, so I can add white as well here just to highlight or lighten that up a bit. And I will take that and darken up around the edges, just what I really want as well, perhaps. I'm making the highlights and shadows part of the pattern rather than making them realistic. So much darker here. That's much darker than the other one. And if you wanted a realism, you'd need 3, 4, 5 colours perhaps, I don't know. Blended in lots of layers and blending solutions and goodness knows what in between. I think the way I work mostly is to work with a kind of pattern in mind. So this side I'm working light to dark, so I'm able to put the lighter colour over the darker colour to blend it that way. And just bringing it to a highlight there, and I am going to pop white in because I can then layer that over the top of the lighter grey. And to be able to get that kind of a blended feeling to it. So that's just those. So let me have a look. Where's my pencil? It's there. Colour soft. Now I was looking, or wanted to look at these for what would be best for adding a shadow underneath. And as you know, I'm not a fan of using graphite because that grey, it just doesn't work very well for me. I prefer a bluer colour. Graphite with water is interesting, as is the watercolour, but I get that line because you have to do it across the whole area and I don't want that. I'll have this mismatch, which is why I'm not all that comfortable with my particular drawing here. You can see I've got some shadowing going on, but I get this, you get an edge where if I don't carry on all the way down, I'll end up with that kind of edge. But chalk pastels are fine, I think. I think they could actually work on this as long as I'm careful in the colour I choose. And that is the problem for me, is what colour do I choose? Because I do want to add some more intensity of colour and shadow to this. but perhaps not in this video. This is to inform me how I can do things here rather than anything else. And it's given me plenty to look at, plenty to think about, and perhaps given you some ideas. Again, I say this often, you don't have to go out and buy anything that you see me use. I've got things in my stash I use. I've had them for a long time, most of them, not all of them. And I sometimes forget I've got things that I could use. I haven't gone to look at whatever. I know I've got tinted charcoal pencils that I could use, very subtly tinted, but I don't like charcoal very much with this kind of thing either. It's a bit like graphite. It's got that dull sort of, like, to my point of view, it almost feels dirty. I prefer a purer colour or a colour, I think. So Graphite tints are great because you've got that muted colour, that more vintage colour, but you've got a colour, so it's not grey. And that mutedness of it is what I like. But I want to use it with water, which isn't going to be easy as I'm distressing the background. And I'll get those kinds of lines I was talking about. And I don't want those kinds of lines. But, you know, a chalk pastel perhaps in a colour that is synthetic to the background. I don't know, I've got this one just picked up. So if I was to use that to add a shadow, as if to lift this up to add some shadow underneath it, I'm just using whatever tortillon is to hand, mucky or not. Then this does so with the ability for me to get that gradually faded out colour, so I don't get that harsh edge. And I know that with biros and so on, I'd have to use cross hatching or stippling. The same with fine liners, and I've never really got very good results with that. So this is where perhaps the chalk pastels will come in most useful, is by doing that and adding that shadow. They do go quite a long way. That's the main problem with them. This is a pit. Is it pit? No, it's Conte. It's a Conte pastel. And so they do tend to spread a lot further than, say, the Carbothellos would, because the makeup of them is different, and further than the generals would. But they do give that feeling of shadow and of lifting things up. Perhaps not the best colour to choose, but it would kind of work with the background I've got there. Have a look. I need to bring them closer so I can see through my glasses. Let's see if I've got a colour that perhaps would work. Have I got that one, but I thought I had a darker bluey one. I think that one's black. That's black. I think that is the one I'd use. This one is almost a blue-black. I say almost, it's not entirely. So let's have a look and see what will happen if I use this one. Again, I could use this with water because that's what Carbothellos work with, but they also work well just as a chalk pastel, but they don't spread quite as far. And actually, as I'm using the same tortillon, I'm going to get a cross-contamination of colour, which is fine. I said before, this is all about just trying things out and seeing what happens before I go back and try and add shadow to my drawing there. So that's very different. It works actually quite nicely. I think I prefer the Carbothellos to the Contes because they don't spread that far. Okay, Let me find a colour that is a bit more sympathetic to the background in the Contes. About that colour, that looks like it would be. It's not my most favourite brown. I much prefer a rusty brown. So let me have a look here. Let's try this one, because there would be a shadow underneath. Okay, and I will get most probably some colour off the other one, but I can live with that. That one's just a little bit darker than I'd like, but it does add that hint of a shadow, which is what I'm looking for, is that shadow underneath. Perhaps not the best colour, she says, but I could, you know, I've got enough here to try until I go, aha, that's the one I like. I'll have a quick, just one more, just to see. I've got that, I've got this one, but I was thinking about trying a, no, not a pale blue. I've got a pale grey here, so I could try, oops, that, and see how that looks. So let's try the grey first. I think I've changed the orientation of my paper as well, is that I started with this being the bottom of the paper. I'm now working as if it's the top. As I said, shadows. Now that grey, I think, may work a little bit better. It's not as dark as the others, but I prefer its finish compared to, yeah, I think that would work quite nicely. The colours are nice, but the grey is also nice. Perhaps a warm grey would work better, but I'm not going to do more with you. So I think my message here is just try things out and see what happens, and whatever you have in your stash, your collection of media, is to try that and see how it works for you. Just try ideas out. I do like this idea of embossing highlights in, if I'm going to be using things like pencils or pastel pencils, or, you know, colour soft, or whatever other coloured pencils I've got. I think that works nicely. I think it would also work nicely if you put a wash of colour in, then use the embossing tool, and then use coloured pencils to add that depth and dimension, or pastels on top of that base colour. If you're going to use water, remember that with water the indents remain, but they do get filled with colour, which is not unexpected, but I had to try it just in case. It's funny, isn't it, how so many different ways, and each one gives a kind of different feel to what you end up with. This one feels very dull and uninteresting compared to these two, I think, and perhaps even to the ones that have got the embossed lines on. Even though I've got the shadow and highlight, it's still got that feeling of being lacking interest, lacking something like these do. So it may be that a combination of lines and colour, as these, is required, because that the colour helps to bring things to life, but the lines give that colour the texture and form and the detail that's perhaps needed as well. The embossing is an interesting idea for keeping highlights as well. Say, interesting, lots of things to try out. So I hope this is helping and has perhaps given you some inspiration, some ideas of things to try. Sometimes it's that comparison where I can see what I like and what I don't like. I particularly like the biro because I can get those finer and softer lines. Even though I used an 02 micron, I didn't pick an 01 up yesterday, but an 02 micron, which are very fine lines, they're still not really fine enough, or it's that similarity in they don't get really any lighter. It's black, so it's either very fine black or a thicker line of black. Whereas with the biro, I can get that intensity, which is interesting and is now intriguing me again. So, onwards and upwards. I'll just say thank you for joining me. I expect this is going to be another long video, and I hope to see you again for my next video, which will most probably be tomorrow. And until then, take care of yourselves, look after yourselves, enjoy experimenting and exploring, and just trying things out. This is a nice idea, simple shapes, let's see what we can do. And it's the only way, I think, to get to know your media and to get to know what is you and what isn't you. I'm still trying to find out the best way for me to work with colour. And I think colour and shadow, and I think I'm getting there with this. This makes me smile. But then give me another week or two and I'll think, oh no, this isn't right. I'm forever circling around things, but I always seem to come back to this kind of thing. I do. Anyway, take care of yourselves, find time to be creative, and I'll see you again soon. Take care for now. Bye-bye.